The sun hung like a brass button in the cloudless sky, beating down mercilessly on the parched earth of Dust Creek. It was the kind of heat that made the air shimmer and dance above the hard-packed dirt roads, creating mirages that promised water where there was none. The year was 1873, and the small town sat like a forgotten prayer in the middle of nowhere, caught between the vast expanse of desert and the distant purple mountains that seemed to mock any hope of rain. Clara Maynard stood in the doorway of her weather-beaten cabin, squinting against the harsh light. At 23, she had the kind of beauty that the frontier hadn't yet managed to steal away. High cheekbones inherited from her mother's side, eyes the color of sage honey, and hair that caught the sun like burnished copper when she bothered to let it down from its severe bun. But there was something else in those eyes now, something that made folks in town cross to the other side of the street when they saw her coming. Grief had a way of changing a person, and rage even more so. The cabin sat on the outskirts of town, far enough away that she didn't have to hear the constant chatter from the saloon or the clanging from the blacksmith's shop. It wasn't much. 2 rooms with walls that let in the wind and a roof that leaked when the rare rains came. But it was hers. She'd turned the small barn out back into a makeshift stable where she boarded horses for travelers passing through. And the front room served as her workshop, where she repaired firearms for anyone with coin to spare. Clara wiped the sweat from her brow with the back of her hand, leaving a smudge of gun oil across her forehead. She'd been working on a Winchester all morning, its action sticky with desert grit. As she worked, her mind wandered to where it always did these days, to that night 6 months ago when Deputy Morrison had ridden up to her door, hat in hand, to tell her that her father was dead. Sheriff William Maynard had been a good man, perhaps the only truly good man in a town full of shadows and secrets. He'd raised Clara alone after her mother died of fever when she was 8, teaching her to shoot straight and ride hard, to read people's intentions in their eyes before they spoke. He'd been tracking the Jesse Harper gang for months, following their trail of robbed stagecoaches and ransacked banks across 3 territories. The night he died, he'd gotten word that Jesse Red Harper himself was holed up in an abandoned mine shaft 20 miles north of town. He'd ridden out alone. They found his body the next morning, 3 bullets in his back. The whole town had turned out for the funeral, offering their condolences and casseroles, whispering behind their hands about poor Clara. All alone now. Such a shame, they'd said. Sheriff was a good man. That Harper gang's nothing but rabid dogs that need putting down. But after the funeral, when the sympathy dried up faster than rain in the desert, the whispers changed. Always was an odd one, that Clara. They'd say, too much time alone with guns and horses. No wonder she never married. Now she's gone even stranger. They say she talks to herself out there in that cabin. They called her the Mad Maynard girl when they thought she couldn't hear. But Clara heard everything. She heard the fear in their voices, too, because a woman who knew her way around firearms and had nothing left to lose was a dangerous thing in a place like Dust Creek. Clara set down the Winchester and walked to the water barrel, splashing her face with the warm, brackish liquid. She'd hauled it up from the well that morning, and already it tasted of dust and disappointment. As she straightened, movement caught her eye. A lone rider approaching from the east, his horse's hooves kicking up small clouds of red dust. She watched him come, one hand instinctively moving to rest on the Colt .45 she wore on her hip. Strangers weren't uncommon in Dust Creek. The town sat on the route between El Paso and Points North, but Clara had learned to be cautious. The rider was tall in the saddle, wearing a dusty brown duster despite the heat, his hat pulled low against the sun. As he drew closer, she could make out more details. His horse was a good one, a bay gelding with strong lines that spoke of careful breeding. The man himself sat easy in the saddle, the way of someone who'd spent more time on horseback than on foot. When he reined up in front of her cabin, Clara noticed his hands, scarred and weathered, but steady on the reins. "Afternoon, ma'am," he said, touching the brim of his hat. His voice was deep, with a slight rasp that spoke of too much whiskey or too much trail dust. Name's Brown. Heard you might have room to board my horse for a few days. Clara studied him, taking in the stubbled jaw, the lines around his eyes that suggested he was somewhere north of 35. There was something about him that nagged at her, something familiar in the set of his shoulders, but she couldn't place it. $2 a day, includes feed and water, she said curtly. Payment up front. The man, Brown, nodded and dismounted, moving with a slight stiffness that suggested old injuries. He pulled a leather pouch from his coat and counted out the coins, his movements deliberate and careful. When he handed them to her, their fingers briefly touched, and Clara was surprised by the jolt that went through her, not attraction, but something else. Recognition, maybe, though she still couldn't place him. I'll also be needing some supplies, he said. Ammunition, if you got it. .44, 40 cartridges. I can help with that, Clara replied, pocketing the coins. Follow me. She led him and his horse to the barn, noting how his eyes swept the area, taking in every detail, the layout of the buildings, the approaches from the road, the cover provided by the scrub brush. It was the kind of careful observation her father had taught her, the kind that kept a man alive in uncertain times. After seeing to his horse, Clara led him to her workshop. The front room was neat and organized. Rifles and pistols in various states of repair lined up on the workbench. Boxes of ammunition stacked on shelves along the wall. Brown's eyes took it all in with obvious appreciation. You know your way around firearms, he observed. My father taught me, Clara said, reaching for a box of .44, 40 cartridges. Sheriff William Maynard. Maybe you heard of him? Something flickered across Brown's face, there and gone so fast she almost missed it. Can't say I have, ma'am. I'm new to these parts. Liar, Clara thought, but kept her expression neutral. She handed him the ammunition, named her price, and watched as he counted out the payment. This time, she studied his face more carefully, and that's when it hit her like a thunderbolt. The wanted poster was 3 years old, tacked up in her father's office, but she'd memorized every line of that face. Jesse Red Harper, wanted for murder, robbery, and assault across 3 territories. $5,000 bounty, dead or alive. The poster had shown a younger man, clean-shaven with harder eyes, but it was him, the shape of his jaw, the scar cutting through his left eyebrow, the way he held himself like a coiled spring ready to snap. Clara's blood turned to ice water in her veins, then immediately to liquid fire. This was the man who'd killed her father, standing in her own workshop, counting coins into her palm like any other customer. Her hand trembled slightly as she took the money, and she saw his eyes narrow slightly, noting it. Much obliged, ma'am, he said, tipping his hat again. I'll be staying at the hotel in town for a few days. Mind if I check on my horse tomorrow? Suit yourself, Clara managed, her voice surprisingly steady. I'll be here. She watched him leave, waiting until he was out of sight before her knees buckled. She gripped the edge of the workbench, breathing hard, her mind racing. Jesse Harper, here in Dust Creek, walking around bold as brass under an assumed name. The sheer audacity of it made her stomach churn with rage. But why had he come back? Killers didn't usually return to the scenes of their crimes unless they had unfinished business. Was he here to eliminate witnesses? To retrieve something? Or was it mere coincidence? A cruel twist of fate that had brought her father's killer to her door. Clara moved to the window, watching the dust settle in the road where he'd ridden toward town. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. She'd wait until dark, she decided. Wait until he was good and settled in at the hotel. Probably at the saloon by then. Guard down with whiskey warming his belly. Then she'd do what the law had failed to do. She'd give her father the justice he deserved. Clara spent the rest of the afternoon in preparation, cleaning and loading her father's Colt Navy revolver, the one he'd carried through the war and 20 years of keeping the peace. Her hands were steady now, all trembling burned away by the cold fire of purpose. She dressed in dark clothes, pinned her hair up tight, and waited for the desert night to fall. The saloon would be rowdy by now, full of cowboys and drifters, the piano plinking out its tinny melodies while cards shuffled and whiskey poured. Brown would be there. Men like him always gravitated toward liquor and games of chance. She'd wait outside, in the shadows between buildings where the lamplight didn't reach. Wait for him to come out, probably unsteady on his feet, guard down, one shot, that's all it would take. One shot to balance the scales. As the moon rose over Dust Creek, casting long shadows across the dusty streets, Clara Maynard stepped out of her cabin, her father's gun heavy on her hip, her heart hammering with anticipation and righteous fury. The mad Maynard girl was going hunting, and tonight she'd have her revenge. The night air was cool against Clara's flushed skin as she pressed herself against the rough wooden wall of the Mercantile, watching the saloon doors across the street. Light spilled out onto the boardwalk every time someone pushed through, accompanied by bursts of laughter and the clink of glasses. She had been waiting for nearly an hour, her father's Colt a familiar weight against her hip, her breathing shallow and controlled. Then she saw him. Jesse Harper, she refused to think of him as Brown, stepped out of the saloon, pausing to light a cigar. The match flare illuminated his face for a moment, and Clara's grip tightened on her gun. He wasn't drunk, she noted with frustration. His movements were too controlled, too aware. He turned left, heading toward the hotel, and Clara slipped from shadow to shadow, following. The street was nearly empty at this hour, most folks either in bed or still drinking. Clara's boots made no sound on the packed earth as she closed the distance between them. When Jessie turned into the alley beside the hotel, a shortcut to the back entrance, she knew this was her chance. She drew the Colt, her hand steady despite the rage burning in her chest. "Harper," she called, her voice cutting through the darkness. He stopped but didn't turn around. "I was wondering when you'd come," he said quietly. "Sheriff Maynard's daughter. You have his eyes." The casual admission made her finger tighten on the trigger. "Turn around. I want you to see who sends you to hell." Jesse turned slowly, hands visible at his sides. In the dim moonlight filtering between buildings, she could see his face clearly, older than in the wanted poster, marked by sun and wind and something else. Weariness, maybe, or resignation. "Go on then," he said, spreading his hands slightly. "I won't stop you." His calm acceptance threw her off balance. She'd expected him to go for his gun, to fight back, to give her a reason beyond the one she already had. Her hand trembled slightly as she aimed at his heart. "You killed him," she said, her voice cracking. "Shot him in the back like a coward." Something shifted in Jesse's expression. "Is that what they told you?" "Don't you dare," Clara started, but the words died as he moved. Not for his gun, as she'd expected, but stepping closer, his movement slow and deliberate. She squeezed the trigger. The hammer fell on an empty chamber. In her rage and haste, she'd grabbed the wrong gun, her practice Colt, the one she kept unloaded for safety. The click echoed in the alley like a death knell. Jesse moved then, fast as a striking snake, closing the distance between them in 2 strides. His hand closed over hers on the gun, his other arm pinning her against the alley wall. "Try that again, sweetheart," he whispered, his breath warm against her ear. But there was no mockery in his voice, only a deep sadness that made her struggle harder. "Let me go," Clara thrashed against his hold, trying to knee him, bite him, anything to break free. "Murderer, killer." "I didn't kill your father," Jesse said, still in that same quiet tone. He twisted the gun from her grip and tossed it aside, but didn't release her. "Listen to me." "Liar!" Clara spat in his face, satisfaction flooding through her when he flinched. "Everyone knows it was you." "You were there, at the mine?" "I was in Colorado that night." Jesse interrupted. "Running from a posse after a bank job went bad. Whoever told you I killed Sheriff Maynard was lying." Clara stilled, hatred warring with confusion in her chest. "The deputy said, Morrison said they tracked your gang. My gang was scattered to the 4 winds by then." Jesse said. He released her and stepped back, pulling a crumpled paper from his coat. "I kept this. Don't know why. Maybe I knew someone would need to see it someday." With shaking hands, Clara unfolded the paper. It was a receipt from a doctor in Sterling, Colorado, dated the night her father died. Treatment for a gunshot wound, paid in full by one J. Harper. "Could be forged," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Could be," Jesse agreed. "But ask yourself this, why would I come back here? If I killed your father, why would I risk riding into his town, talking to his daughter?" Clara's mind raced. Pieces of a puzzle she didn't want to solve falling into place. The way Morrison had been so quick to bring her the news. The way certain men in town had seemed almost relieved at her father's death. Her father's own concerns in the weeks before he died. The late-night meetings. The worried looks. "He knew something," she whispered. "Pa was investigating something." Jesse nodded slowly. "The Marshal Service sent me a letter 2 months ago. Said Sheriff Maynard had been in touch, wanting to make a deal. Information about corruption in exchange for reduced charges on some of my men. I came to see what he knew, but he was already dead." Clara slumped against the wall, suddenly exhausted. The rage that had sustained her for 6 months flickered and threatened to die, leaving only emptiness behind. "Who, then? Who killed him?" "That's what I'm here to find out," Jesse said. "Your father was a good man. One of the few honest lawmen I ever encountered. He deserved better than 3 bullets in the back." Clara studied him in the dim light, seeing him truly for the first time. Yes, he was an outlaw, a thief, and probably worse. But there was honor in his bearing, a code that meant something even if it wasn't the law's code, and his eyes, when he spoke of her father, held genuine respect. "I need to think," she said finally. She broke off, shaking her head. "If you're lying to me, I'm many things, Miss Maynard, but I'm not a liar." Jessie bent and retrieved her empty gun, checking the chambers before handing it back to her. "And next time you come gunning for someone, make sure your weapon's loaded." Despite everything, Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I don't make the same mistake twice." "Good." Jessie touched the brim of his hat. "I'll be at the hotel for a few more days. If you decide you want to know the truth about your father's death, you know where to find me." He turned to go, then paused. "And Miss Maynard? Might want to be careful who you trust in this town. Your father learned that lesson too late." Clara watched him disappear into the darkness, her mind churning. Everything she'd believed for 6 months had just been shattered, leaving her adrift. But if Jessie was telling the truth, and her instincts, honed by her father's training, said he was, then her father's real killer was still out there, maybe right here in Dust Creek, hiding behind a badge or a respectable business. She made her way home in a daze, barely noticing the familiar streets. Once inside her cabin, she lit a lamp and went to her father's old desk, the one she'd barely touched since his death. If he'd been investigating corruption, there might be evidence, something the killers hadn't thought to look for. The first drawer held the usual detritus: pen nibs, ink bottles, a half-eaten peppermint stick that made her eyes burn with sudden tears. The second had official documents, arrest reports, correspondence with other sheriffs. But it was in the third drawer, hidden beneath a false bottom her father had shown her years ago, that she found what she was looking for. Letters, a dozen of them. Some in her father's careful script, others in hands she didn't recognize. She spread them on the desk, reading by lamplight as the truth unveiled itself like a rattlesnake shedding its skin. The Silver Star Mine, supposedly played out 5 years ago, was producing again. Secretly, someone was smuggling ore out through Dust Creek, using the bank to launder the profits. Her father had traced shipments, documented meetings, built a case that implicated half the town's leading citizens, including Deputy Morrison and banker Josiah Hartley. One letter, dated a week before her father's death, made her blood run cold. "William, stop this investigation immediately. You have a daughter to think of. Some stones are better left unturned. This is your only warning." A friend. Clara's hands clenched, crumpling the paper. They'd threatened him, and when he hadn't backed down, they'd killed him. made it look like Jessie Harper's work to throw off suspicion, and she'd fallen for it, so blinded by grief and rage that she'd never questioned the story. A sound outside made her freeze. Footsteps on the porch, slow and deliberate. Clara grabbed her loaded Colt this time, checking the chambers before moving to the window. A shadow moved past, and she heard the doorknob rattle. Without thinking, she yanked open the door. Gun raised. A man stood there, his face hidden by a black bandana, a knife glinting in his hand. For a split second, they stared at each other. Then he lunged. Clara fired, the shot going wide as she dodged the blade. It caught her sleeve, tearing fabric and skin. She stumbled backward, trying to get another shot off, but he was on her. Knocking the gun aside, they crashed into the furniture. Clara fighting with desperate fury, knowing if she lost, she'd end up like her father. The man was stronger, heavier, pressing her down despite her struggles. The knife rose, and Clara closed her eyes, thinking absurdly that at least she'd learned the truth before she died. The weight suddenly lifted. She opened her eyes to see Jessie hauling her attacker back, spinning him around to land a punishing blow to his jaw. The man staggered but came back swinging the knife. Jessie sidestepped, grabbed the man's wrist, and twisted sharply. The crack of breaking bone was followed by a scream. The attacker fled, cradling his broken wrist, leaving Jessie and Clara alone in the wreckage of her cabin. Jessie kicked the dropped knife aside and knelt beside her, his hands surprisingly gentle as he examined her arm. "It's not deep," he said, pulling a bandana from his pocket, "but it needs cleaning. Why did you? Clara couldn't form the questions properly, shock making her tongue clumsy. "Figured they might make a move once they realized you'd been following me," Jessie said, wrapping her arm with practiced efficiency. "Been watching your place since I left you in the alley. You were protecting me?" The irony of it, the man she'd tried to kill saving her life, made her laugh, a sound bordering on hysteria. "Your father was trying to do the right thing," Jessie said quietly. "Least I can do is make sure his daughter lives long enough to finish what he started." Clara looked up at him, seeing the mix of danger and honor that made him who he was. Outlaw, killer, and now, somehow, her protector. The world had gone mad, turned upside down in the space of a single night. "They killed him," she said unnecessarily. "Morrison, Hartley, probably others, because of the mine." Jessie nodded. "Question is, what are you going to do about it?" Clara thought of her father, of justice denied and truth hidden. She thought of the attack tonight, how they'd come for her just as they'd come for him. The rage was still there, but focused now, aimed at the right targets. "I'm going to finish what he started," she said, meeting Jessie's dark eyes. "But I can't do it alone." A slow smile crossed Jessie's face, transforming his harsh features. "Good thing you've got an outlaw on your side then, sweetheart." Despite everything, the pain in her arm, the danger closing in, the madness of trusting her father's supposed killer, Clara found herself almost smiling back. Tomorrow would bring new dangers, new challenges. But tonight, she'd found an unlikely ally and uncovered the truth. It was a start. Jessie finished binding Clara's wound as dawn crept across the desert, painting the mountains in shades of rose and gold. They'd spent the night sorting through her father's papers, piecing together the conspiracy that had cost him his life. Now, with her cabin no longer safe and enemies closing in, a decision had to be made. "We can't stay here," Jessie said, rolling down her sleeve gently. "They'll come back with more men." Clara nodded, exhaustion weighing on her shoulders like a lead blanket. "Where do we go? Morrison has deputies all over the territory." "I know a place," Jessie said after a moment. "Old hideout up in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, abandoned mining cabin. It's rough, but it's defensible." "The mountains?" Clara looked toward the purple peaks in the distance. "That's 2 days' ride through rough country. Better than staying here and waiting for a bullet." Jessie stood, checking his guns with practiced efficiency. "Pack what you need. We leave within the hour." Clara moved through her cabin like a ghost, gathering essentials, ammunition, dried food, her father's papers, a photograph of her parents on their wedding day. Each item she packed felt like another goodbye to the life she'd known. When she emerged, Jesse had already saddled both horses, her paint mare dancing nervously beside his steady bay. They rode out as the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the desert floor. Clara looked back once at Dust Creek, seeing smoke rising from chimneys, the town waking to another day. Somewhere in those buildings, her father's killers were probably congratulating themselves on last night's work, assuming she'd be too frightened to pursue the matter further. They were wrong. The first day's ride was brutal. Jesse set a punishing pace, following trails Clara hadn't even known existed, always staying off the main roads. They spoke little, saving their energy for the journey, but Clara found herself stealing glances at her unlikely companion. In daylight, she could see more clearly the marks his outlaw life had left. Scars on his hands, a slight favor to his left side that spoke of old injuries, the constant vigilance in his dark eyes. When they stopped to water the horses at a hidden spring, Clara finally asked the question that had been burning in her mind. "Why did you really come back? It wasn't just about my father's investigation?" Jesse was quiet for a long moment, watching his horse drink. "I fought in the war," he finally said. "Confederate side, though that matters less now. When it ended, I came home to find everything gone. Farm burned, family dead from fever, started robbing to survive, then kept at it because—" he shrugged. "Because I was good at it, I suppose, and angry." "That doesn't answer my question." Clara pressed. "Your father wrote to me personally," Jesse admitted. "Not through the Marshal Service. Said he'd been studying my case. Noticed something. My brother Thomas, he was hanged for murder 5 years ago in Kansas. Your father found evidence he was innocent, framed by the same group that's operating here. He offered to help clear Thomas's name." Clara felt her throat tighten. That sounded like her father, unable to let injustice stand even for an outlaw's family. "I'm sorry about your brother. He was the good one," Jesse said simply. "Tried to go straight after the war, took up clerking in a bank. They said he killed a man during a robbery, but Thomas never held a gun after Appomattox. Wouldn't even hunt anymore." They mounted up and continued on, the terrain growing rougher as they climbed into the foothills. By late afternoon, storm clouds were building over the peaks, purple-black and ominous. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain and lightning. "We need shelter," Jesse said, scanning the landscape. "There's a cave about a mile up. We can wait out the storm there." They barely made it before the sky opened up. Rain came down in sheets, turning the trail into a muddy torrent. Inside the cave, they huddled with the horses, watching lightning split the sky. Clara shivered in her wet clothes, and Jesse built a small fire from dry wood someone had stashed there long ago. "Here," he said, shrugging off his coat and draping it around her shoulders. It smelled of leather and gunpowder and something uniquely him. "I can manage," Clara protested, but her teeth were chattering. "No sense in you catching pneumonia," Jesse said. "Won't do your father's memory any good if you die of fever." They sat in silence, watching the fire dance. Outside, the storm raged, turning the world into a chaos of water and wind. Clara found herself oddly comforted by Jesse's presence, this dangerous man who'd become her protector. "Tell me about him," Jesse said suddenly. "Your father. What was he like when he wasn't being sheriff?" Clara smiled despite everything. "He loved to fish. Every Sunday. If things were quiet, we'd ride out to Willow Creek. He was terrible at it, impatient, always moving around and scaring the fish. But he loved the peace of it." Her voice softened. "He used to say the fish were smarter than most criminals he dealt with." "Sounds like a good man." "He was maybe too good for a place like Dust Creek." Clara pulled Jesse's coat tighter. "He believed in the law, in justice, even when it was hard, even when it cost him. And he taught you to shoot," Jesse observed. "Said a woman alone needed to be able to protect herself. Mama died when I was young, and he He worried about me. Clara's smile was bittersweet. Taught me to ride, shoot, track, everything he knew. The town ladies were scandalized. Thunder crashed overhead, making the horses shift nervously. Jesse moved to calm them, his hands gentle on their necks, murmuring words Clara couldn't catch. When he returned to the fire, he sat closer than before. "Storm's getting worse," he said. "We'll have to stay here tonight," as if to emphasize his words. A brilliant flash of lightning illuminated the cave mouth, followed immediately by thunder that seemed to shake the mountain itself. Clara instinctively moved closer to Jesse, then caught herself, embarrassed by the impulse. "I'm not usually afraid of storms," she said defensively. "Nothing wrong with being afraid," Jesse replied. "Fear keeps you alive out here. It's what you do with it that matters." They settled in for the night, sharing what food they had: hard biscuits, dried beef, a few withered apples. The storm showed no signs of abating, turning the cave mouth into a waterfall. As the fire burned lower, Clara found herself drowsing despite the thunder, exhausted by the day's ride and the emotional toll of the past 24 hours. She woke sometime later to find herself leaning against Jesse's shoulder, his arm around her for warmth. She should have pulled away, should have been appalled at the impropriety. Instead, she found herself relaxing into his solid presence. He was awake, she realized, standing guard even here. "Sleep," he said quietly. "I'll watch. Don't you need rest?" "Gotten used to light sleeping over the years. Old habits." Clara was quiet for a moment, then asked, "What's it like, living outside the law?" Jesse considered the question. "Lonely," he said finally. "Free in some ways, but empty. No home, no future. Just the next job, the next town, staying ahead of the law or a bullet. Then why not stop? Go somewhere they don't know you. Start over." "Tried that once. The past has a way of finding you." His voice was resigned. "Besides, what else would I do? All I know is guns and horses and staying alive." "That's not true," Clara said, surprising herself with the conviction in her voice. "You came back to help clear your brother's name. You saved my life. There's more to you than just being an outlaw." Jesse was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, so quietly she almost missed it. "Your father said something similar in his letter. Said every man deserved a chance at redemption." The storm finally began to ease near dawn, the thunder growing distant, the rain tapering to a drizzle. They broke their makeshift camp, Clara trying not to think about how natural it had felt to wake in Jesse's arms, how safe she'd felt despite everything. The day dawned clear and cold, the storm having washed the air clean. They continued their climb into the mountains, the trail growing ever more treacherous. Clara's paint mare picked her way carefully along the narrow path, sometimes with a sheer drop only inches away. "How did you find this place?" Clara asked as they navigated a particularly narrow section. "Holed up here after a job went bad in Denver," Jesse replied. "Spent a winter here with what was left of my gang. Most of them moved on come spring, but I remembered the spot." By afternoon, Clara was beginning to wonder if they'd ever reach this mysterious hideout when Jesse suddenly reined up. "There," he said, pointing. At first, Clara saw nothing but trees and rocks. Then her eyes adjusted and she spotted it, a cabin built into the mountainside. So weathered it seemed part of the landscape itself. It was smaller than she'd expected. Maybe 2 rooms? With a lean-to that would serve as a stable. "It's not much," Jesse said, something almost apologetic in his tone. "It's perfect," Clara said, meaning it. Here, hidden away from the world, they could plan their next move without fear of discovery. They spent the rest of the day making the cabin habitable. The roof leaked in places and mice had gotten into what supplies remained, but the structure was sound. Jesse chopped wood while Clara swept and cleaned, and by nightfall they had a decent shelter, smoke rising from the chimney into the cold mountain air, as they shared a simple meal by the firelight. Clara found herself studying Jesse again. The dangerous edge was still there, would always be there. But she saw other things now too. The careful way he tended the fire, the gentleness with which he'd treated her wound, the pain in his eyes when he spoke of his brother. "What are you thinking?" Jessie asked, catching her stare. "That you're not what I expected." Clara admitted, "When I thought you killed my father, I pictured a monster, but you're just a man. Men can be monsters too," Jessie said darkly. "I've done things I'm not proud of. Clara, don't make me into something I'm not." "I'm not," Clara said firmly. "But I'm beginning to think my father saw something in you worth saving, and he was rarely wrong about people." Jessie looked at her across the fire, something unreadable in his expression. "Your father was one of a kind. I just hope we can finish what he started." "We will," Clara said with fierce determination. "Morrison, Hartley, all of them. They'll answer for what they did." Outside, wolves howled in the distance, wild and free. Clara shivered, but not from cold. Tomorrow they would begin planning their war against the men who destroyed her world. Tonight, though, she was simply grateful to be alive, to have an ally in this fight, even if that ally was the last person she'd ever expected. As she prepared for bed in the cabin's small back room, Clara touched the photograph of her parents she'd placed on the rough wooden shelf. "I'll make them pay. Pa," she whispered. "I promise." In the main room, she could hear Jessie settling in for the night, taking the first watch as always. Dangerous protector, unlikely friend, and perhaps something more she wasn't ready to name. Whatever happened next. Clara knew her life had changed forever the moment Jessie Harper rode back into Dust Creek. The mountain night wrapped around the cabin like a blanket, and for the first time since her father's death, Clara fell asleep feeling something other than rage or despair. It might have been hope. The morning brought an unseasonable snow, unusual for September even in the high country. Clara woke to find the world transformed into pristine white, every branch and rock wearing a delicate crown of frost. She wrapped herself in a blanket and stepped outside, her breath forming small clouds in the crisp air. Jessie was already up, standing at the edge of the clearing with his rifle, keeping watch as always. Snow dusted his dark hair and the shoulders of his coat, but he seemed unbothered by the cold. When he heard her approach, he turned, and something in his expression made her heart skip unexpectedly. "Beautiful," he said, and for a moment Clara wasn't sure if he meant the snow or something else. "It won't last," she replied, pulling the blanket tighter. "Weather changes fast up here. Most beautiful things don't last," Jessie said quietly, his gaze holding hers. They stood there in the hushed morning, snow falling softly around them, and Clara felt something shift between them. The anger and suspicion of their first meeting had given way to trust, and now to something deeper, more dangerous than any outlaw's gun. "We should gather more wood," she said, breaking the spell. "If this weather holds, we'll need it." They worked through the morning, Jessie chopping while Clara stacked, their movements falling into an easy rhythm. By the time the sun broke through the clouds, melting the snow into glittering droplets, they had enough wood to last several days. "I need to teach you knife work," Jessie said as they took a break, sharing water from his canteen. "That attack at your cabin, you fought well, but you need more than just guns up close." Clara nodded, though the thought of close combat made her stomach tighten. "All right." He produced a hunting knife from his boot, flipping it to offer her the handle. "First rule, a knife is more personal than a gun. You have to be willing to get close, to look your enemy in the eye." They spent the afternoon training, Jessie showing her how to hold the blade, how to move, how to use her smaller size to her advantage. He was a patient teacher, correcting her stance with gentle touches that sent unwanted sparks through her body. "You're thinking too much," he said after she fumbled a defensive move. "Fighting is like dancing. You have to feel it, not plan it." "I've never been much of a dancer," Clara admitted, frustrated. Jessie studied her for a moment, then sheathed the knife. "Come here." Before she could protest, he'd positioned them as if for a waltz, one hand at her waist, the other holding hers. "Now, when I step forward, you step back. When I turn, you follow. Feel the movement." They moved slowly around the cabin's main room, No music but the wind outside and the crackle of the fire. Clara found herself relaxing into the rhythm, her body learning to anticipate his movements. "Better," Jesse murmured, his breath warm against her ear. "Now imagine the knife in your hand. Same movements, same rhythm." They practiced until Clara's muscles ached and the sun began its descent toward the peaks. When they finally stopped, she realized how close they were standing, how natural it felt to be in his arms. "I should start dinner," she said, stepping back, her cheeks warm despite the cool air. Jesse nodded, but she caught something in his eyes, longing, perhaps, quickly hidden behind his usual careful control. They ate in companionable silence, the tension between them like another presence in the room. Clara kept stealing glances at him, noting the way the firelight caught in his dark hair, the strong lines of his hands as he cleaned his guns. "Tell me about your gang," she said, needing to break the silence. "The men who rode with you." Jesse considered the question. "Most were like me, lost souls after the war, men with nothing left to lose. Some were good men who'd made bad choices. Others," he shrugged, "others were the kind who enjoyed the violence too much." "Which kind was your brother?" A sad smile crossed his face. "Thomas was the kind who believed we could be better. Even after everything, he had hope, said we couldn't let the war define us forever." His voice turned bitter. "Look how that turned out." Clara reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. "He was right, though we can be better than our worst moments." Jesse turned his hand palm up, interlacing their fingers. "Your father raised an optimist." "He raised a realist," Clara corrected, "but one who believes in justice and in redemption." They sat there, hands linked across the rough table, and Clara felt the last of her defenses crumbling. This man, outlaw, killer, thief, had shown her more kindness and protection than anyone since her father's death. He'd risked his life for her, a stranger who'd tried to kill him. "Jesse," she began, not sure what she wanted to say. He stood abruptly, releasing her hand. "It's getting cold. I'll bank the fire." Clara recognized the withdrawal, the walls going back up. She stood as well, moving around the table to face him. Don't what? Don't pull away. Not now." She reached up, touching his face, feeling the roughness of stubble under her palm. "I know what you are. I know what you've done, but I also know who you're choosing to be now." "Clara," he said, her name a warning and a plea. "You don't understand. Men like me, we don't get happy endings. We don't get to care about good women and live to see another sunrise." "Maybe that's been true before," Clara said, standing on her toes to bring their faces closer. "But we're changing the rules, remember, starting with bringing down the men who killed my father." Jesse's control finally broke. He pulled her against him, one hand tangling in her hair, the other pressing against the small of her back. "You're playing with fire, sweetheart." "Then let me burn," Clara whispered, and kissed him. It was nothing like she'd imagined her first real kiss would be. No gentle, tentative exploration. This was fire and desperation. 6 months of grief and rage and loneliness pouring out in a clash of lips and tongues. Jesse kissed like he did everything else, with intense focus and barely leashed wildness. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Clara felt transformed. The proper sheriff's daughter was gone, replaced by someone fiercer, more alive. "This is dangerous," Jesse said, though he didn't release her. "Everything about this is dangerous," Clara pointed out. "But I'm tired of being afraid, tired of being alone." He studied her face, and she saw the moment his resistance crumbled. This time, when he kissed her, it was slower, deeper, a promise rather than a battle. They stumbled toward the bedroom, hands fumbling with buttons and belts, the need to be closer overwhelming any thought of propriety. Later, they lay entwined on the narrow bed, Clara's head on Jesse's chest, listening to his heartbeat slowly return to normal. The dying firelight painted shadows on the rough walls, and outside an owl called, lonely in the darkness. "I never expected this," Jesse said quietly. his fingers combing through her unbound hair. "Which part?" Clara asked. "Running from the law with the sheriff's daughter, or—" "Any of it. Thought I'd die in some dusty town. Another nameless outlaw nobody would mourn." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Your father's letter changed everything. And you've changed everything." Clara propped herself up on an elbow, looking down at him, in the soft light, with his defenses down. He looked younger, almost vulnerable. "What happens when this is over? When we've exposed Morrison and Hartley?" "I'll still be wanted in 3 territories," Jesse said realistically. "Still be Jesse Harper, train robber and killer." "You could go somewhere they don't know you. California, maybe, or Oregon. Start fresh. And you?" Clara hadn't thought that far ahead. Her whole life was in Dust Creek. Her father's grave, her mother's memory, the only home she'd ever known. But as she looked at Jesse, she realized none of that mattered as much as it once had. "I don't know," she admitted. "I just know I don't want to lose this. Lose you." Jesse pulled her back down, holding her tight against him. "Let's survive the next few days first. Then we can worry about the future." They made love again as the moon rose. Slower this time, learning each other's rhythms and responses. Clara discovered scars she hadn't seen before. A bullet wound in his shoulder, knife marks on his ribs, the map of a violent life written on skin. She kissed each one, as if she could heal the old wounds with tenderness. When exhaustion finally claimed them, they slept entwined, no longer outlaw and sheriff's daughter, but simply 2 people who'd found each other in the wilderness, building something fragile and precious in the shadow of vengeance. Clara woke near dawn to find Jesse's side of the bed empty, but still warm. She heard him moving in the main room and pulled on his discarded shirt. Padding out to find him, he stood by the window, fully dressed, checking his weapons with methodical precision. "Going somewhere?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Need supplies," he said without turning. "And information. There's a trading post about 10 miles north. Owner's an old friend who keeps his ear to the ground. I'll come with you." "No." He turned then, and she saw the walls were back up, the dangerous outlaw reasserting himself. "It's too risky. People know your face. People know yours too," Clara pointed out. "Different kind of knowing. I can handle it." He crossed to her, cupping her face in his hands. "Stay here. Stay safe. I'll be back by nightfall." Clara wanted to argue, but she saw the wisdom in his words. They couldn't both risk capture. "Be careful." "Always am." He kissed her, quick and fierce, then gathered his coat and rifle. At the door, he paused. "Clara, last night?" "I know," she said softly. "Me too." After he left, Clara busied herself with chores, trying not to think about all the things that could go wrong. She cleaned the already clean cabin, organized their supplies, practiced with the knife until her arms ached. When the sun reached its zenith with no sign of Jesse, worry began to gnaw at her. By afternoon, she was pacing, unable to settle. Every sound made her jump. Wind in the trees became approaching horses. Birdsong became warning signals. She checked and rechecked her weapons, planned escape routes, imagined scenarios where Jesse was captured or killed, where she was alone again. When she finally heard hoofbeats approaching near dusk, she nearly cried with relief. But her relief turned to alarm when she saw Jesse slumped in the saddle, his coat dark with blood. "Just a graze," he said as she helped him down, though his face was pale. "But we've got bigger problems. Morrison knows we're working together. He's put a bounty on your head too now, $500, dead or alive." Clara's hands shook as she helped him inside, but her voice was steady. "Then we'd better make sure we take him down before he collects." As she tended Jesse's wound, a bullet groove along his ribs, painful but not serious. Clara felt something harden inside her. They'd crossed a line last night, chosen each other over safety or sense. Now there was no going back. Morrison and his conspirators had taken her father, tried to take her, and now threatened the man she'd come to love. They would learn what happened when you cornered a Maynard. The war for Dust Creek was about to begin. Clara finished wrapping Jesse's wound as he told her what he'd learned at the trading post. Morrison had men watching all the roads out of the territory, and Hartley had hired professional bounty hunters from Texas, men who wouldn't hesitate to shoot first and collect their reward from corpses. "We need those documents," Jesse said, wincing as he pulled his shirt back on. "Without proof, we're just outlaws making accusations." "The evidence my father gathered is hidden in the church," Clara said. "I put it there the night you came back. Figured it was the last place they'd look." Jesse nodded grimly. "Then we go get it, tonight, while they're not expecting us to move with me wounded. You're in no condition. I've ridden with worse." His eyes were hard with determination. "Every day we wait, they get stronger, more prepared. We hit them now, or not at all." They prepared carefully, loading extra ammunition, checking weapons, planning routes. As the moon rose, they mounted up and began the treacherous descent from the mountains. Jesse rode stiffly, and Clara could see the pain in the tight lines around his mouth, but he never complained. They approached Dust Creek from the east, using a dried creek bed to mask their approach. The town lay quiet under the stars, most windows dark, only the saloon showing signs of life. Clara's heart pounded as they tied their horses behind the abandoned mill and crept through the shadows toward the church. The small wooden structure sat at the town's edge, its modest steeple reaching toward heaven. Clara had attended services here every Sunday with her father, listening to Reverend Miller's gentle sermons about forgiveness and redemption. Now she picked the lock with tools Jesse had given her, whispering a mental apology to God for the trespass. Inside, moonlight filtered through plain glass windows, illuminating rows of simple pews. Clara moved to the altar, kneeling to pry up a loose floorboard where she'd hidden the oilskin packet. Her fingers had just closed on it when she heard horses outside. "Company," Jesse hissed, moving to the window. "4 riders. Morrison's leading them." Clara's mind raced. They were trapped. Only one door, windows too small to squeeze through. She clutched the packet to her chest, thinking of her father, of Jesse, of justice so close yet impossibly far. "The bell tower," she whispered. "There's a ladder." They climbed quickly, Clara first with Jesse following, protecting their rear. The small bell chamber was cramped, barely room for 2 people among the ropes and mechanisms. Through the slats, they could see Morrison and his men surrounding the church. "Come on out, Clara," Morrison's voice carried clearly in the still night. "We know you're in there. No sense making this harder than it needs to be." Jesse checked his rifle, his face grim. "Soon as we start shooting, they'll rush us. Not much cover up here?" Clara looked around desperately, then up at the bell. An idea formed, reckless but possible. "How's your arm?" "Good enough." "Why?" "Because we're going to ring our way out of here." She grabbed the bell rope. "When I give the signal, you start shooting. Make them take cover. I'll handle the rest." Before Jesse could protest, Clara yanked hard on the rope. The bell tolled, loud and sudden in the quiet night, startling the horses below. She rang it again and again, the bronze voice echoing across Dust Creek. "What in blazes?" Morrison started. "Now!" Clara shouted. Jesse opened fire, his shots precise even in the awkward space. Morrison's men scattered for cover as Clara continued ringing the bell, its clamor waking the town. Lights appeared in windows, voices raised in alarm. "The church!" someone shouted. "Something's happening at the church!" Within minutes, townspeople were gathering, some still in night clothes. Drawn by the commotion, Morrison couldn't gun them down with witnesses, especially not in a church. Clara saw him gesture angrily to his men, and they began to fall back. "Clever girl," Jesse murmured, admiration clear in his voice. They waited until the crowd grew larger, then made their way down. Reverend Miller had arrived, key in hand, and Clara had never been so glad to see the elderly preacher. "Clara Maynard," he said, taking in her appearance. Jesse beside her. "What's the meaning of this?" Sanctuary, Reverend, Clara said quickly. Men were trying to kill us. We needed help. The Reverend's eyes narrowed as he noticed Morrison lurking at the crowd's edge. Is that so? Well, this is God's house. All are welcome who seek protection. He raised his voice. I trust no one would violate the sanctity of this holy place. Morrison's face was thunder, but he couldn't act, not with half the town watching. Clara saw him exchange looks with Hartley, who'd just arrived, and knew they were planning something. We can't stay here, Jesse said quietly. No, but we bought time. Clara pressed the packet of documents into Reverend Miller's hands. Read these, Reverend. Show them to people you trust. The truth about my father's death is in there. The old man's eyes widened as he glanced at the papers. Clara, this is dangerous, I know, but my father trusted you, and so do I. They slipped out during the confusion, making it back to their horses as the crowd grew larger. As they rode hard for the mountains, Clara looked back to see torches gathering near the church, the whole town stirring like a kicked anthill. That was risky, Jesse said as they climbed back into the foothills. Everything we do is risky, Clara replied. But now others know the truth. Morrison can't silence a whole town. They pushed the horses hard, knowing pursuit would come with dawn. Jesse swayed in his saddle, the wound taking its toll, but refused to stop until they were well into the mountains. Finally, as the eastern sky began to lighten, Clara insisted they rest. She found a sheltered grove near a stream, helping Jesse down and checking his bandages. Fresh blood seeped through and his face was pale beneath his tan. Just need a few minutes, he mumbled, but Clara could see he was near collapse. She made him as comfortable as possible, covering him with blankets, then took position with his rifle to watch their back trail. The morning was crisp and clear, birds beginning their dawn chorus, the world seeming impossibly peaceful after the night's chaos. An hour passed, then two. Clara was beginning to think they'd evaded pursuit when she spotted movement below, riders picking their way up the trail. Not Morrison's men, she realized with a chill. These moved like professionals, spread out to avoid ambush, checking signs with practiced ease. The bounty hunters. Clara woke Jesse urgently. His eyes snapped open, instantly alert despite his exhaustion. How many? He asked. 4 that I can see, maybe more. Jesse struggled to sit up, checking his weapons. We can't outrun them, not with me slowing us down. Then we make a stand. No. His voice was firm. You take the horses, ride hard for the cabin. I'll hold them here. I'm not leaving you, Clara said fiercely. Clara, no. She gripped his shoulders. We're in this together. You don't get to play the noble sacrifice. Jesse looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right. Then we do this smart. You take position up in those rocks. I'll stay here. Make them think I'm alone and wounded. When they commit to the attack, I hit them from the flank. Clara finished. Just like you taught me. They prepared quickly, Clara climbing to a concealed position among the boulders. Jesse made himself visible by the stream, playing up his injury, letting his rifle lie just out of easy reach. The bounty hunters appeared like ghosts from the trees, spreading out in a half circle. Clara recognized the type. Hard men who made their living on others' misfortune. No different from buzzards, except they didn't wait for their prey to die. Jesse Harper, one called out. A tall man with silver conchos on his hat. You've led us quite a chase. Beginning to think you boys were lost, Jesse replied, his hand inching toward his pistol. 5,000 on your head, another 500 on the woman. Where is she? Couldn't tell you. Woman got smart. Lit out on her own yesterday. The bounty hunter smiled coldly. Now that's disappointing. Guess we'll have to make do with just you. Clara saw him signal his men, saw them raising their rifles. She didn't wait. Her first shot took the leader in the shoulder, spinning him around. Her second caught another man in the leg. Jesse rolled and came up firing, his pistol barking sharp in the morning air. The grove erupted in gunfire. Clara fired and moved, using the rocks for cover as bullets whined past. She saw Jesse dive behind a fallen log, saw him reload with practiced efficiency despite his wound. One bounty hunter tried to flank her, creeping up the rocks. Clara let him come, waiting until he was close, then struck with the knife Jesse had given her. It slid between his ribs, and she felt the shock of it through her arm. The horrible intimacy of killing at close range. The man's eyes widened in surprise before he toppled backward. When the gunsmoke cleared, 3 bounty hunters lay dead or dying. The leader, wounded but alive, was trying to crawl to his horse. Jesse walked over, kicked the man's gun away, and looked down at him coldly. "You're going to live," Jesse said. "Go back and tell Morrison and whoever else will listen. Clara Maynard is under my protection. Anyone comes for her, they answer to me." The man spat blood but nodded, understanding the message. Jesse let him go, watching as he struggled onto his horse and rode away, slumped over the saddle. Clara climbed down from the rocks, her hands shaking now that the danger had passed. She looked at the bodies, at the blood soaking into the earth, and felt sick. "First kill is always the hardest," Jesse said quietly, understanding. "It should be, moment it gets easy is the moment you lose yourself." She nodded, unable to speak. Jesse pulled her against him, and she buried her face in his chest, breathing in the familiar scent of leather and gunpowder, grounding herself in his solid presence. "We need to move," he said after a moment. "There'll be more." They gathered what supplies they could from the dead men, ammunition, food, a medical kit that would help with Jesse's wound. As they rode away, Clara looked back once at the grove, now marked by violence and death. "I've changed," she said softly. "The girl who left Dust Creek would never have." "You did what you had to do," Jesse said. "To survive, to fight for justice. Your father would understand." Clara hoped he was right. As they climbed higher into the mountains, she felt the weight of her transformation. She'd set out to avenge her father, and found herself becoming something she'd never expected. A woman who could kill, who could love an outlaw, who could face down the corrupt powers that ruled her world. The sun climbed higher, burning away the morning mist. Behind them, vultures began to circle. Ahead lay their mountain refuge. But Clara knew it was only temporary. The real battle was coming. And after today, there would be no mercy on either side. "Jesse," she said as they rode, "when this is over, if we survive, will you take me with you, wherever you go?" He reached over, taking her hand. "To the ends of the earth, sweetheart, I promise you that." Clara squeezed his hand, drawing strength from the contact. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The sheriff's daughter and the outlaw, bound by love and vengeance, riding toward either justice or doom. Word of the church incident spread through Dust Creek like wildfire. By the time Clara and Jesse reached the mountain cabin, exhausted and bloodied, the town below was in upheaval. From their high vantage point, they could see riders moving in and out of town, and even from this distance, there was a sense of urgency in their movements. Jesse collapsed onto the cabin's rough bed, his wound having reopened during their flight. Clara worked to clean and rebandage it, her hands steady despite her exhaustion. The medical supplies taken from the bounty hunters proved invaluable: proper bandages, laudanum for the pain, and a bottle of whiskey for cleaning wounds. "You need rest," Clara said, pulling a blanket over him. "Real rest, not just an hour here and there." "Can't afford it," Jesse protested, trying to sit up. Morrison will do nothing for a few days," Clara interrupted. "The whole town knows something's wrong now. Reverend Miller has those documents. Let them work while you heal." For once, Jesse didn't argue. The combination of blood loss and exhaustion finally overtook him, and he slipped into a deep sleep. Clara sat beside him, watching his chest rise and fall, memorizing the planes of his face in the afternoon light. In sleep, the hard edges softened, and she could see the man he might have been in a different life. As evening fell, Clara forced herself to leave his side. She checked their defenses, counted ammunition, and prepared a simple meal. The familiar tasks helped calm her nerves, though she couldn't shake the memory of the knife sliding between the bounty hunter's ribs, the surprised look in his dying eyes. Jesse woke near midnight, disoriented and reaching for his gun. Clara caught his hand, soothing him back to awareness. "It's all right," she whispered. "We're safe." He relaxed against the pillows, then winced as the movement pulled at his wound. "How long?" 6 hours. You needed it." She helped him sit up, offering water and some broth she'd prepared. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been shot," he said with a wry smile. "But I'll live." They sat in comfortable silence while he ate, the fire crackling in the hearth. Finally, Jesse set aside the bowl and looked at her seriously. "Clara, I need to tell you something. About your father. About why I really came back." She tensed but nodded for him to continue. "That letter he sent me, it wasn't just about my brother or the corruption here. He'd heard rumors about a federal marshal coming to investigate the territorial government. Your father was trying to stay alive long enough to testify." Jesse's expression darkened. "I think that's why they killed him when they did. Someone warned them." "A federal marshal?" Clara felt hope kindle in her chest. "Then there's still a chance for real justice. If he ever shows up, these investigations can take months, years even. And Morrison knows it's coming now. He'll be destroying evidence, intimidating witnesses. Not if the whole town turns against him first." Clara stood, pacing as she thought. "Reverend Miller is respected. If he speaks out about what's in those documents, it's dangerous for him," Jesse warned. "Morrison's killed before to keep his secrets. Then we protect him, and anyone else willing to stand up." Clara turned to face Jesse, her eyes bright with determination. "We've been playing defense, running and hiding. It's time to take the fight to them." Jesse studied her for a long moment. "You're thinking like an outlaw now. Maybe that's what it takes. The law failed my father. Maybe it's time to try it your way." Over the next 2 days, they planned carefully. Jesse's wound began to heal, and his strength returned, though Clara insisted he continue to rest. They sent careful messages down the mountain with a prospector Jesse trusted, gathering intelligence about the town's mood. The news that came back was encouraging. Reverend Miller had indeed shared the documents with trusted townspeople. The banker Hartley was facing questions about missing funds. Deputy Morrison was finding his authority challenged, his orders questioned. The town was a powder keg, waiting for a spark. On the 3rd night, that spark came in an unexpected form. Clara was keeping watch when she saw riders approaching, not the stealthy advance of bounty hunters, but a direct approach with torches. She woke Jesse, and they prepared for another siege, but the riders stopped well out of rifle range. "Clara Maynard," a voice called out. "Jesse Harper, we come in peace, to talk." Clara recognized the voice. Samuel Brennan, owner of the general store, a man her father had respected. Beside him, she could make out other figures, townspeople she knew. "What do you want, Brennan?" Jesse called back, rifle ready. "To make a deal. The town's divided. Miss Clara. Half think you're criminals, the other half think you're heroes. We need the truth, all of it, straight from you." Clara and Jesse exchanged glances. It could be a trap, but it could also be their chance. "Just you, Brennan." Clara called, "Leave your guns with your men." The storekeeper dismounted and walked forward, hands visible. In the firelight, Clara could see his weathered face was drawn with worry. He'd aged in the days since she'd last seen him. "Things are bad in town," he said without preamble. "Morrison's getting desperate. He arrested Reverend Miller this morning, claims he's harboring fugitives. Hartley's barricaded himself in the bank with hired guns." "And the federal marshal?" Jesse asked. Brennan's eyes widened slightly. "So you know about that. Word is he'll be here within the week." "Morrison's planning something. My boy overheard him talking about cleaning house before the marshal arrives." Clara felt cold dread settle in her stomach. "He means to kill everyone who could testify against him." "That's our fear," Brennan confirmed. Some of us, good people who are tired of the corruption, we want to fight back. But we need help. We need... He looked at Jesse. We need someone who knows how to fight dirty. You're asking us to come back, Clara said. To trust you. I'm asking you to save our town. Brennan replied simply. Your father died trying to do right by Dust Creek. Don't let his sacrifice be for nothing. Jesse was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right, but we do this my way. And if this is a trap, Brennan. It's not, the storekeeper said firmly. You have my word, and the word of a dozen other families who remember when this town stood for something. They spent the next hour planning. Brennan would return to town, organize the resistance quietly. Clara and Jesse would come down from the mountains the following night, but not as expected. While Morrison prepared for a frontal assault, they would strike where he was weakest. After Brennan left, Clara found herself unable to sleep. She stood outside the cabin, looking down at the distant lights of Dust Creek, thinking of her father. Jesse joined her, wrapping a blanket around both their shoulders. You don't have to do this, he said quietly. We could leave tonight, head for Mexico, start fresh. Clara leaned into his warmth. You know I can't do that. I know, just had to offer. He pressed a kiss to her temple. Your father would be proud of you. Would he? Clara wondered. His daughter falling in love with an outlaw, planning to take the law into her own hands. His daughter fighting for justice when the system failed. Jesse corrected. Fighting for truth. That's all he ever wanted. They stood together watching the stars wheel overhead, both knowing that tomorrow might be their last day. The peace of the mountain cabin, their brief sanctuary, would soon be a memory. Jesse, Clara said softly, if something happens tomorrow, nothing's going to happen, he interrupted. If something happens, she continued firmly, I want you to know that these days with you, they've been worth everything. I'd rather have had this time with you than a lifetime of safety without it. Jesse turned her in his arms, looking down at her with an intensity that took her breath away. You're not going to lose me, Clara, and I'm not going to lose you. We're going to win tomorrow, and then we're going to have that lifetime together. I swear it. He kissed her then, deep and desperate, as if he could seal the promise with his lips. They made love with an urgency born of uncertainty, clinging to each other as if they could hold back the dawn through sheer will. Later, as Clara lay in Jesse's arms listening to his heartbeat, she thought about the strange turns her life had taken. She'd set out to kill this man, and now she couldn't imagine living without him. She'd been a respectable sheriff's daughter, and now she was planning to lead an uprising against the very law she'd once believed in. But sometimes, she realized, justice and the law weren't the same thing. Sometimes it took an outlaw to bring down corruption. Sometimes it took love born from hate to heal a broken heart. Tomorrow, they would ride down from the mountain one last time. Tomorrow, the battle for Dust Creek would be decided. But tonight, in the shelter of Jesse's arms, Clara allowed herself to believe in the future he'd promised. A future where they could stop running, stop fighting, and simply be. The fire burned low, casting dancing shadows on the cabin walls. Outside, a wolf howled in the distance, wild and free. Clara closed her eyes and tried to memorize everything. The warmth of Jesse's body, the sound of his breathing, the feeling of being completely, utterly alive. Tomorrow would bring violence and possibly death, but it would also bring the chance for justice, for redemption, for a new beginning. Clara Maynard, the mad girl who talked to guns and horses, would ride back into Dust Creek not as a victim but as an avenging angel. And beside her would be Jesse Harper, the outlaw who'd stolen her heart and given her the strength to fight. The mountain held its breath, waiting for the storm to break. The trial of Jesse Harper took place 3 weeks after the uprising that had cleansed Dust Creek of its corruption. The federal marshal, a stern man named Thomas Whitaker, had arrived to find the town already transformed. Morrison dead, Hartley imprisoned, and a new order emerging from the ashes of the old. Clara sat in the packed courtroom, her hands folded tightly in her lap, watching as Jesse stood before the judge. He looked different in his clean clothes and fresh shave, but his bearing remained proud, unbowed by the chains on his wrists. "Jesse Harper," Judge Matthews intoned, "you stand accused of the robbery, assault, and numerous other crimes across 3 territories. How do you plead?" "Guilty, Your Honor," Jesse said clearly. "To most of it." A murmur ran through the crowd. Clara's heart clenched, but she kept her expression neutral. They'd discussed this. Jesse wouldn't lie about his past, but he'd tell the whole truth. For 2 days. The trial continued. Witnesses spoke of Jesse's crimes, but also of his actions in Dust Creek. Reverend Miller testified about Jesse's role in exposing the corruption. Samuel Brennan described the uprising, how Jesse had risked his life to save innocent townspeople from Morrison's last desperate attempt to silence them. Clara herself took the stand on the 3rd day, describing her father's investigation, his murder, and Jesse's arrival. "He could have left," she said, meeting the judge's eyes directly. "When I tried to kill him, when the bounty hunters came, when the whole town was against us. But he stayed. He fought for justice when the law had failed us." "That's admirable, Miss Maynard," the prosecutor said. "But it doesn't erase his past crimes." "No," Clara agreed. "But perhaps it shows who he's chosen to become." The judge deliberated for hours. When he finally returned, his expression was grave. "Jesse Harper, this court finds you guilty of the charges brought against you." Clara's heart sank. "However, in light of your recent actions and the testimony presented, this court sentences you to exile from these territories rather than imprisonment. You will leave within 48 hours and not return, on penalty of death." The gavel fell with finality. Jesse's shoulders sagged with relief, and Clara felt tears burn her eyes. Exile was better than the noose, but it still meant losing him. That evening, Clara visited Jesse in his cell one last time before his release. Deputy Martin, the honest lawman who'd replaced Morrison, let her in with a sympathetic nod. 48 hours, Clara said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Where will you go?" "California, maybe," Jesse said, reaching through the bars to take her hands. "Somewhere I can start fresh." He paused, searching her face. "Clara, don't," she said quickly. "Don't ask me to come with you, not yet." Jesse's face fell, but he nodded. "I understand. This is your home. Your father's buried here." "It's not that." Clara squeezed his hands tighter. "There's something I need to do first." The next morning, Jesse was released. Clara watched from her cabin as he prepared to leave, packing his few belongings, checking his weapons. The town had returned his horse and gear, a small mercy in the harsh justice of the frontier. As he mounted up, Clara approached, carrying a cloth bundle. "Your father's journal," she said, handing it to him. "The parts about your brother, the evidence he gathered. It might help clear Thomas's name." Jesse tucked the journal carefully into his saddlebags. "Thank you." They stood there, everything and nothing left to say. Around them, Dust Creek was waking to a new day, hammers ringing as people rebuilt what the fire had destroyed. Children playing in the streets without fear. Honest commerce resuming. "All right," Jesse said finally. "General delivery in San Francisco. If you ever—" "I know," Clara interrupted. She reached up, pulling him down for a kiss that tasted of tears and promises. "Now go, before I beg you to stay." Jesse touched her face once more, then spurred his horse into motion. Clara watched until he disappeared into the desert heat shimmer, then turned back to her cabin, squaring her shoulders against the grief. But she had work to do. Over the following weeks, Clara threw herself into helping rebuild Dust Creek. She organized the town's women to care for families who'd lost breadwinners in the uprising. She worked with the new sheriff to establish fair laws. She taught at the school when the teacher fell ill, sharing her father's love of learning with eager young minds. The town began to see her differently, not as the Mad Maynard girl, but as a leader, someone who'd sacrificed everything for justice. They elected her to the town council, the first woman ever to serve. She used the position to push for changes her father would have been proud of. But at night, alone in her cabin, she read Jesse's letters. He'd made it to California, found work breaking horses for a rancher near Sacramento. He wrote of golden hills and ocean breezes, of building a small house on land he was saving to buy. He never asked her to come, but the invitation was there between every line. 6 months passed. Dust Creek prospered under honest leadership. The federal investigation cleared out corruption in the territorial government. The town even erected a statue to Sheriff William Maynard in the square, honoring the man who'd died fighting for justice. Clara stood at the dedication, listening to speeches about her father's courage and integrity. But her mind was elsewhere, on a letter that had arrived that morning. Thomas Harper cleared of all charges. Jesse had written, "Your father's evidence did it. My brother's name is clean. I thought that would be enough, but it's not. Not without you." That night, Clara walked through Dust Creek one last time. She stopped at her parents' graves, laying fresh flowers and whispering her goodbyes. She visited Reverend Miller, leaving instructions for her property to be used as a school. She settled her affairs with quiet efficiency, telling no one of her plans. At dawn, she saddled her paint mare and rode out of Dust Creek. In her saddlebags were her few precious possessions: her mother's ring, her father's badge, Jesse's letters, and a new beginning. The journey to California took 3 weeks. Clara rode alone, confident in her skills, savoring the freedom of the open trail. She thought of all the women who'd never have this choice, trapped by convention and circumstance. Her father had raised her to be different, and Jesse had shown her she could choose her own path. She found the ranch on a warm September afternoon, following Jesse's directions to a valley where golden grass waved in the Pacific breeze. The house was small but well built, with a view of distant mountains. Horses grazed in the pasture, and she could see a figure working near the barn. Jesse looked up at the sound of hoofbeats, his hand instinctively moving to his hip where no gun rested. Then recognition dawned, and he dropped the hammer he'd been holding. Clara dismounted slowly, suddenly nervous. They'd been apart 6 months. What if things had changed? What if the connection they'd forged in danger couldn't survive peace? "Took you long enough," Jesse said, but his voice was rough with emotion. "I had things to finish," Clara replied. "Debts to pay. And now? Now I'm here, if you'll have me." Jesse crossed the distance between them in 3 strides, pulling her into his arms with desperate relief. "If I'll have you, Clara, I've been waiting for you every damn day." She kissed him, pouring 6 months of loneliness and longing into the contact. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. "Marry me," Jesse said suddenly. "I know I'm still an outlaw everywhere but here, and I can't give you the life you deserve. But—" "Yes," Clara interrupted. "Yes, of course, yes." They were married a week later by a circuit preacher, with Jesse's ranch hands as witnesses. Clara wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit, and Jesse wore his best suit. It wasn't the society wedding she might once have imagined, but it was perfect. As they stood together, exchanging vows as the sun set over their new home, Clara thought about the strange path that had led her here, from grief to rage to love, from respectability to outlawry to redemption. She'd lost her father but found herself. She'd sought vengeance but discovered justice. She'd tried to kill Jesse Harper but ended up saving him and being saved in return. "Do you take this man?" the preacher asked. Clara looked at Jesse, her outlaw, her protector, her future, and smiled. "I do." The wedding night was spent in the house Jesse had built with his own hands, in a bed he'd crafted thinking of her. They made love with the passionate relief of lovers too long separated, relearning each other's bodies, whispering promises in the darkness. Later, as Clara lay in Jesse's arms, watching stars through the window, she felt her father's presence like a benediction. He would have understood, she thought. He'd believed in redemption, in second chances, in the power of love to transform even the most broken souls. "No regrets?" Jesse asked softly. "None," Clara said with certainty. "This is where I belong, in Dust Creek, They would remember her as the sheriff's daughter who tamed an outlaw and saved the town. But here in California, she was simply Clara Harper, rancher's wife, living proof that sometimes the greatest adventures began where the old stories ended. The past was done. The future stretched before them, bright with possibility. And in the quiet of their new home, two souls who'd found each other in violence and loss finally discovered peace. As sleep claimed her, Clara smiled. Somewhere, she was certain, William Maynard was smiling too. 5 years had passed since Clara rode into the California Valley to start her new life with Jesse. The small ranch had prospered under their care, growing from a modest homestead to a thriving horse breeding operation. The house had expanded too, Jesse adding rooms with his own hands as their needs changed. Clara stood on the porch, watching the sunrise paint the hills gold, a cup of coffee warming her hands. At 28, she had grown into her beauty, the harsh edges softened by happiness, but the strength still evident in her bearing. She wore a simple cotton dress, but the gun belt around her waist served as a reminder that some things never changed. "Mama, Papa says breakfast is ready," a small voice called from inside, followed by the patter of bare feet on wooden floors. Clara smiled, turning to catch her daughter as 4-year-old Rose burst through the door. The child had Jesse's dark hair, but Clara's amber eyes, and a spirit wild as the mustangs her father trained. "Is that so? Well, we'd better not keep him waiting." Clara scooped Rose up, carrying her inside where Jesse stood at the stove, an apron tied around his waist. "Morning, sweetheart," he said, leaning over to kiss Clara while balancing a pan of eggs. The years had been kind to Jesse. At 41, his hair showed silver at the temples, and laugh lines creased his eyes. But he moved with the same easy grace that had first caught Clara's attention. The dangerous edge had mellowed into quiet strength, though Clara knew it could resurface if their family was threatened. They ate breakfast together, Rose chattering about her plans to help her father with the new foal. It was a scene of such domestic tranquility that Clara sometimes had to pinch herself to believe it was real. After the meal, as Rose ran outside to feed the chickens, Jesse pulled Clara close. "Letter came yesterday," he said quietly, "from Dust Creek." Clara's heart skipped. They rarely heard from her old home, and news was not always welcome. "What is it?" "Reverend Miller passed peacefully in his sleep, but there's more." Jesse retrieved the letter from the shelf. "They want you to come back for the memorial. The whole town does. They're also dedicating the new school, the Clara Maynard School for Children." Clara sank into a chair, emotions washing over her. Reverend Miller had been one of the few to support her during those dark days. And a school in her name? Her father would have been so proud. "We could go," Jesse said carefully. "My exile was from the territories. California's a state now, and Dust Creek is no longer territorial land." "But is it safe for you, for Rose?" "Samuel Brennan is sheriff now. He included a note guaranteeing our safety." Jesse knelt beside her chair. "It's your choice, Clara. But I think it might be good to go back. To show Rose where her mother came from." Clara thought of her parents' graves, untended for 5 years, of the town that had shaped her, for better and worse, of the ghosts that perhaps needed laying to rest. "All right," she said finally. "We'll go." The journey back to Dust Creek took 2 weeks with a child in tow. Rose proved to be an excellent traveler, inheriting both parents' comfort in the saddle. She peppered them with questions about the desert, the rocks, the animals they saw. As they crested the final hill, Dust Creek spread before them. Clara barely recognized it. The ramshackle frontier town had grown into a proper settlement, with painted buildings, planted trees, and actual streets instead of dusty tracks. "It's so different," Clara breathed. "You helped make it this way," Jesse reminded her. "The seeds you planted grew strong." They were met at the town limits by Samuel Brennan, now wearing a sheriff's star. His hair gone completely gray, but his smile warm as ever. "Clara Harper," he said, helping her down from her horse. "Welcome home." The next days passed in a whirlwind of reunions and revelations. The memorial for Reverend Miller drew the whole town, with Clara asked to speak about his courage during the uprising. She stood at the pulpit where he'd once preached, looking out at faces both familiar and new. Reverend Miller taught us that faith without works is dead. She said, he didn't just preach justice, he fought for it, risked everything for it. He showed us that God's house could truly be a sanctuary for all who sought protection. Later, at the school dedication, Clara cut the ribbon with shaking hands. The building was beautiful, 2 stories of clean white paint with large windows to let in light. Inside, rows of desks waited for young minds, and shelves held more books than the old school had ever dreamed of. Your father would be bursting with pride, Brennan said quietly. That evening, Clara took her family to the cemetery. Jessie carried Rose, who'd grown quiet, sensing the solemnity of the moment. Clara knelt at her parents' graves, clearing away 5 years of desert growth. "Hi, Pa," she said softly. "Mama, I'm sorry I stayed away so long." She touched the headstones, weathered but still standing strong. "I want you to meet someone. This is Jesse. You already knew about him. Pa, and this is Rose, your granddaughter." Rose, usually irrepressible, leaned against her father's shoulder. "Are they angels now, Mama?" "I like to think so," Clara replied, watching over us. They stayed in Dust Creek for a week, Clara reconnecting with old friends, Jesse earning wary respect from those who remembered his outlaw days. Rose charmed everyone, especially when she demonstrated her skill with the lasso, taught by her father. On their last night, the town threw a dance in the new community hall. Clara wore the one fine dress she'd packed, and Jesse looked handsome in his black suit. They danced to fiddle music while Rose played with other children, her laughter bright as silver bells. "No regrets about coming back?" Jesse asked as they swayed together. "None," Clara said. "It was good to see how things have changed, how we've all changed." As if to test that change, a group of young cowboys burst in, drunk and rowdy. One of them, barely 20, started hassling the musicians, demanding livelier tunes. Clara saw Jesse tense, his hand moving instinctively to where his gun would have been. But it was Clara who acted. She walked over to the young troublemaker, looking him up and down with the same cool assessment she'd once used on Jesse. "You're Bert Daniels's boy." She said it wasn't a question. The cowboy blinked, swaying slightly. "Yeah, so your daddy was a good man who'd be ashamed to see you acting this way? You've got 2 choices. Apologize to these folks and enjoy the dance peacefully, or deal with me." She let her coat fall open, revealing the Colt at her hip. "And trust me, boy, I've dealt with much worse than a liquored-up pup." The cowboy's companions pulled him back, whispering urgently. Clara caught the words, "Harper's wife," and "killed 3 men in the uprising." The troublemaker's face paled. "Sorry, ma'am," he mumbled. "No harm meant. Good choice." Clara said pleasantly, "Now go dance with that pretty girl who's been watching you all evening," politely, as the cowboys retreated, properly cowed. Jesse appeared at her elbow. "Still protecting the peace, I see. Someone has to." Clara smiled up at him. "Though I prefer our peaceful valley to this." The next morning, they prepared to leave. Half the town turned out to see them off, pressing gifts on them. Preserves for Clara, a new bridle for Jesse, toys for Rose. It was a far cry from Clara's flight 5 years before. As they rode out, Rose secure on the saddle in front of Jesse, Clara turned for one last look. The morning sun caught the church steeple, the school's windows, the neat houses of a town reborn. She raised her hand in farewell, then faced forward toward their future. They camped that night by the same stream where Jesse had kissed her in the rain years before, as Rose slept between them under the stars. Jesse reached over to take Clara's hand. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for giving me this life, for believing I could be more than what I was." "You already were more," Clara replied. "You just needed someone to see it." They made it home to find everything as they'd left it, their ranch hands having managed well in their absence. As Clara unpacked, she found the daguerreotype they'd taken in Dust Creek, Their little family formally posed, looking serious as the custom demanded. But she could see the happiness in their eyes, the love that had transformed them all. That night, as she tucked Rose into bed, her daughter asked, "Mama, will you tell me the story about how you met Papa?" Clara sat on the bed's edge, smoothing Rose's dark hair. "Well, once upon a time, there was a girl who thought she knew everything about justice and revenge." She told a gentler version, suitable for young ears, but kept the essential truth, that love could bloom in the most unlikely places, that people could change, that courage came in many forms. When Rose finally slept, Clara found Jesse on the porch, watching the stars. She settled beside him on the bench he'd built, leaning into his warmth. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "About that first night, when you tried to shoot me." He chuckled softly. "Try that again, sweetheart." I said, "Thank God you did." Clara laughed, remembering her fury, her certainty. "I was so angry, so lost. And now," she looked around at their home, thought of their daughter sleeping safe inside, of the life they'd built from ashes and hope. "Now I'm found." A coyote called in the distance, wild and free. The old Clara might have reached for her gun. This Clara simply listened, appreciating the reminder that wilderness still existed beyond their peaceful valley. That edge was still part of her, would always be part of her. The woman who'd faced down outlaws and corruption, who'd chosen love over law, but it no longer defined her. She was Clara Harper now, wife, mother, rancher, living proof that the most dangerous journeys led to the sweetest destinations. The sheriff's daughter who'd tamed an outlaw. No, two broken people who'd saved each other. As they sat together under the vast California sky, Clara felt complete. The past had brought them together, but it no longer held them captive. They'd written their own story, one of redemption and transformation, of love stronger than vengeance. Jesse pulled her closer, and Clara closed her eyes, listening to his heartbeat, steady as the mountains, sure as sunrise. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, the ordinary miracles of a life fully lived. But tonight, they were simply Jesse and Clara, two souls who'd found home in each other against all odds, and that, Clara knew, was the greatest adventure of all. In the distance, their horses whickered softly, and the wind carried the scent of sage and possibility. The West was changing, growing civilized, but in their valley, a little wildness remained. Just enough to keep life interesting. Just enough to remember that the best stories were the ones you never saw coming. Thank you all for listening to this tale from the Wild West. I'd love to hear where you're enjoying this story from, whether you're listening during your commute, relaxing at home, or perhaps even out on the open trail yourself. Please subscribe to Wild West Campfire and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your stories and reactions keep these campfire tales alive. Until next time, partners.